All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD1112 Java Android programming class, I'm now going to be going over the last chapter in the PDF we've been using for the class, and it's on publishing your app out to the Google Play Store. All right, now I'm going to bounce back and forth between the notes and the presentation by Air India, which I actually thought was pretty good. It's a half an hour long, might be worth your time. That's the good news. The bad news is this has changed markedly from when I did it a year ago, and it may have changed since then as well. So we'll see as we go on. The key points in this chapter should still be the same. They're going to talk in here. The chapter is really broken up, as it says here, into two main sections: preparing the app for release, and then the steps you have to go through to actually publish it. All right, so preparing your app for release, as it says, you want to make sure your app is really, really ready. So in other words, it shouldn't break. It should run, it should handle any bad cases. So what I did was I brought up the old, and it is old, BMI program right here. And I haven't even run it, so I'm going to run it right now. Hopefully there won't be any errors in it. Hopefully it can go back and forth if I've got multiple screens. I don't know what version this is. So there it is. Bad graphic in there. It looks like it's way out of shape, but that's fine. So 77 and 111. Calculate, and they're underweight. That looks good. All right, and there's the picture. Okay, and that's a pretty simple example, but that's fine. All right, so I should be able to come in here, put in 177. All right, and there's an optimal weight. Put in 199. Looks like that's still, oh, that's optimal weight, 77. How about 222? Okay, that's overweight. And how about 333? And that is obese. Okay, the clear works. Everything appears to work. Again, the graphics aren't exactly stellar, but it's totally fine. If I leave this blank, program doesn't blow up. I really should have probably given myself a toast down there, but it's okay. All right, if I put in a negative number, I want to see if it's going to take that. All right, it just cleared it out. And so there's ways that this program could definitely be improved. Let's come back to that a little bit later, okay? All right. Because I wanted the idea of this chapter is to go through the steps here. So it says the high-level tasks for publishing your app to the Google Play Store are these 5 that are shown right here. Prepare the app for release, generate the signed APK, which is basically your executable, upload that APK to the Google Play Developer Console, Google Play Store, which is probably the hardest step out of all of them. Run alpha and beta tests, and publish it to the world. So, as mentioned here, an APK is basically a zip file that has everything that you need in order to be able to run the program on a user's device. It always has an APK extension, and it says you need an APK to publish your app to the Google Play Store. So before you do that, what should you do? Well, many of the steps that are in here should just be common sense. Test your app thoroughly. Test, and then test some more. Make sure the app has correct filters. We'll get into what that is in just a bit. Add an icon. So the icon is basically going to be, you don't want that simple launcher icon. It's going to be what the user sees and if they save the app, so if they download it and save it on their phone, it's going to be the icon that's associated with it. Choose an application ID. This is in your Gradle file, and by default, it's your package name, whatever you put on the end of your package, but you can change that if you want to. Specify the API level targets, clean up the app. So notice it says when the app is completely ready, you can generate a signed APK. So take a look at the launch checklist. Now, one thing I found with this, again, some of this documentation that's in here, now notice, from August 2021, new apps will be required to publish with the Android app bundle on Google Play. All right, so there's already changes. But the checklist that's in here, much of the stuff that's in here is common sense. Understand program policies. In other words, don't put anything in there illegal, dirty, such as pornographic type of thing, violent, bullying, etc. Prepare your developer account, so if you don't have one, you can go through the steps that are here. Plan for localization. Well, again, the idea is if you're going to have an app that is going to put things in different languages, you'd want to handle that. Plan for simultaneous releases. That won't be an issue for us. Test against quality guidelines, and again, you can see what those are right here. Target a recent API level. So in other words, it says there must target at least 9.0 starting here. Ours, I'm pretty sure, is later than that. Build your Android app bundle. Run internal tests. It all goes through a lot of planning and stuff that's in here. All right. You can check the pre-launch reports, so you can actually use Firestore to run your app, and it'll go and it'll run. It'll say where it's bound to blow up, etc. Okay. Set up your app's price and countries for distribution. Opt in. So notice, there's about 25 steps in here. All right. So I'd strongly recommend that you take a look at this in more depth and breadth of coverage than I just did. Now, again, I told you that I'm going to be kind of also going through these, and this is the lady who gave it. But notice it's pretty much the same types of things that we've already been talking about. All right. Again, notice each Android application is compiled and packaged into a single APK file that contains virtually everything that is needed for the project. It's even possible that you can take that APK file and email it to a friend who's got an Android phone, and there's a series of steps. I actually tried it once and it worked, but it's been years. But they may have to unzip the file. I think they do at least, and then they can run it right on their phone. All right, but as it says, you need an APK file to publish on Google Play. So these are the same steps that we're starting to walk through right now. Again, test, test, test. Add the icon. Make sure you've got the correct filters. Choose an application ID. Specify the targets. Clean up the app. Generate the signed APK rather. This is that preparation list that I just showed you. All right, so again, I'm going to bounce back and forth between these two. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, this is the way I've decided to go over this last chapter that's in here. So test the app thoroughly. You can never test an app too much. I've given some of my own horror stories, but it's very, very simple to have some kind of a fairly simple error message that comes up when somebody tries to do something with your program that they shouldn't, either purposely or accidentally. So you can't test an app too much. All right. When a user searches or browses for apps on the Play Store, the results include only apps that are compatible with the user's device. What does that mean? That means, as it says, if the person is using a phone with a small screen, they won't include projection screen in the results. All right. If somebody does not have fingerprint software, for example, to check for biometrics, it typically won't show it if you check things on your screen. The easiest way to bring that stuff back in there, and to give the biometric example, is to just add it into the manifest file, which again means that you are putting in those permissions or asking for those permissions. All right, and they go through some other stuff. There's hardware filters you can go through, software filters you can go through, etc. What you'll see a little bit later when we look at the countries, I believe they've got 149 countries that they've listed there, unless that's changed in the last few months. And you can either turn it on for all countries, turn it off for all countries, which wouldn't make a lot of sense, or turn it on for just selected countries that you want. All right, so adding a launcher icon to your app. It says the launcher icon is the graphic that represents the application. When a user has installed the app, the launcher icon is what appears on the home screen and in their Manage Applications. So right now, most of the stuff that we have in ours is just the picture of the Android mascot. You don't really want that. So notice there's an Android launcher icons design guide that you can read. I'm not going to go over that. All right, next we want to add an application ID. As it says, this is going to be inside your build.gradle file, and you'll notice that by default, it is the same name as your package name. You don't have to do that. In fact, if you end up taking your app later and you change the original, I believe you have to change this application ID file, because it's once it's out there on the system, it's unique. You cannot republish it with the same application ID file. Since you have to change the name, that means that anyone who's got your file, if they want to go or has your app, who wants the new version, there's going to be some work you're going to have to do to make it easier for them. It's not just that they're going to automatically get it. All right, specifying the API level targets and version number. Notice the minimum SDK. That's the minimum version of the Java platform on which the app will run. We chose that when we first came in and started the project. The target SDK is you want the user to run on that or later. Typically, you want that to be just about as late as possible. Now, you can specify those in both the manifest file and the build.gradle. I've never put it in a manifest file. I've always put it in the build.gradle. And if you do put it in both, as it says here, what you put in build.gradle will override what's in the manifest file anyway. So there it is. So if we bring up our program right here, and I bring up under my Gradle scripts, I go to my build.gradle. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want the one for the project. I want the module one. So there it is. There's our SDK version. We're using 30, and they're saying you should have 9 or above. So our minimum SDK here is 16. Probably could have bumped that up a little bit, but it's okay. Here's that application ID that we talked about. All right, and here's the version. So if you do start making changes, you'll want to up the version as well. All right, I'm going to close that because I don't really want that open if I don't have to have it open. All right, so they show you some minimum and maximum versions in here. I'm not going to run through that stuff. They're saying, again, you should have at least 6, which was back in 2015, and that's API 23. Again, we're using 30. So I think we got version like 9 or something like that, so we should be fine. All right. It says you can generate different product flavors for your app. So in other words, customize different versions. It says, for example, you could have a demo version and a production version. I've never done that. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but there's probably very viable reasons for doing so. You want to reduce your app size because the smaller the app, the faster it loads. And because some people might have a very slow plan and it might take a while for something to download, especially if you've got a lot of images and the like in yours. If it's a game where you've got a lot of different screens, you know, if it takes too long to download it, they might just say the heck with it. Even if it is free, it's not worth it. So as it says, the size of the APK will affect how fast the app loads, how much memory it uses, and the amount of power that it consumes. As mentioned here, there's no particular magic in minimizing the size of the APK. Most of what you do, as it says, is common sense. Clean up the project folders. If the project folders should ideally just have the information that's shown here. It says make sure that the source does not contain any jar files. How do you know that? Well, you'd have to go back in and you'd have to bring up the project and you'd have to go into your source folder and start taking a look. All right, there's mine, and it doesn't look like I've got anything in there. Now in here, notice I don't, even here I don't have my generated, etc. There's nothing that I can see in here. All right, there's no jar files. Jar file is a Java archive file. It's a zip file that gets opened when the program's running as needed. The library file, if you've added some library stuff and then later pulled it back, all right, in other words, you found another way to do it, maybe you built it with your own code, then remove those. The JNI and file, as it says, files associated with the Android Native Developer Kit. That allows you to, for example, combine your program with C programs, C++ programs, etc. All right, these are C header files, and these are, I believe those are Linux make files. The res, as it says, the subfolders which contain layouts, colors, and strings, there shouldn't be anything in there that's not needed, is what they're saying. Next, disable logging and debugging. and check production URL. So if you've got log statements throughout the program, get rid of them. Don't just comment them out, just get rid of them, remove them. All right, it says remove logging statements and calls to show TOS. Well, I was going to put TOS in, I won't for that reason. Remove all debug tracing, disable debugging in the manifest. All right, so if you've done any testing, make sure that those test files have been removed. Reduce the size of the app's images. All right, there are different things that you can use. For example, there's crunch programs that they'll talk about in just a minute. All right, but I don't really have a lot of images in here, and the ones I have are fairly small in size. If you want to find out more on how to reduce the size of the app, there is a Reduce API Size Guide. One good thing about Android is it's basically got guides for just about everything. Okay, they do recommend that if you can, use vector drawables. Vector drawables are typically defined, as it says, in XML files. They don't take up very much room, and they're drawn on the fly, so to speak. All right, so then we're ready to generate, as it says, upload, and do it what it is we want to do. All right, so it says when your app is ready to upload to Google Play, you must generate and sign the APK for your app. I'm going to do this in just a bit. Android Studio has tools for generating your app and signing it with a digital certificate. When it runs the app, it creates a public certificate and a private key. Don't share that private key with anyone. It attaches the public certificate to the APK. You must securely store the private key in a key store. As it says, the public key is like a fingerprint that uniquely associates the API key to you and your private key, and it makes sure that what you say comes from you, and no one else can put some bogus stuff out there that isn't yours. If you want more information, you can go to the Sign Your App guide that's here. Now, I'm going to stop it right here. We've got about 5 pages left in the chapter here. 430, 31, 32, 33, 34. All right. And before I go on and start actually going through the Publisher app, I'm going to stop, look, and kind of go through cleaning up my app with you, and then attempt to run this. All right, so let's quickly go back to here. Again, if you use Firebase Cloud Test Lab, and you'll have to look this up on your own because I haven't done anything with it, it says you can test on devices in a data center. And what will happen is it will run your program. Basically, you're kind of giving up control, or I don't know if you give a copy or what, but it'll run and look for errors. Okay, the launcher icon again is what's going to appear in your list of icons. The filters we talked about, the application ID I talked about, and there's an example here. There it is. By default, it'll be the same name as your package name, but you can go in and change it. All right, we talked about the minimum SDK version. As it says, it's the minimum that you need to run the app. The target is what it's designed for. All right, and we looked at these again. This is a very out of tune because this thing is about 3 years old, so it's got Nougat 24. We're already up to 30. We talked about cleaning up the app, putting it, removing stuff that you don't need in there. Again, mention the fact that APK size matters. As it says, how fast the app loads, how much power it uses, the memory it consumes, and again, this was that guide on how to reduce the APK size. And we went through the steps and what you have to clean up. All right. We just went through the public and the private keys. And now we're up to the publish to Google Play. So there's like 60 slides here. I'm about halfway through the slides, and I'm about halfway through this presentation. It may not look like it, but really and truly I am. Okay? All right, so let's see. I don't need that. So I'm going to stop right now and then come back, look at my program a little bit, make sure it looks okay, and then attempt to actually put this thing out on the Google Play Store. So I'll be back in just a couple minutes.